All right, so hello everybody. It is time now for another Feature Friday. So we're going to start a series on Watson Studio. And you're like, what does Watson have anything to do with Maximo or Manage? Well, actually, in the newer versions of Application Suite, Watson is starting to have quite a presence. So let's start out small. Get yourself a CSV file or a spreadsheet with some random data in it, and get yourself an account for free in Watson Studio. And let's kind of walk through a few steps that you might find pretty interesting. So here we go. Okay, so let's start out by going to the Watson Studio website. Very easy to find out there. And the first thing you'll do is find the Try It Free button. It'll ask you where you want to have this hosted, and notice you're actually using Cloud Pak for data. Go ahead and agree to the terms, create your account, log in with your account, go through all that good stuff, and eventually you'll end up with a screen that says, what would you like to do? In our case, we're just going to cancel out here and go to the main screen and eventually click on Work with Data. So the first step, really, no matter what you're doing, is to create a project. And quite simply, you just give it a good name of some kind. You can describe it if you'd like. And also, as you get into this, you're able to define actually where the data is being stored. Once you've done all those things, lower right corner, click Create. Give the system a moment, and you'll end up with a project to start working with. So now that you have a project, you can start defining the assets that are in your project. So go to the Assets tab, and the first thing we're going to do is define a source of data. So if you create a new asset, you can see there's quite a few different kinds that you can build. The simplest one, probably the most common one, is to connect to a data source. And if you choose that tile, you immediately see a very long list of the different types of data sources that you are able to interact with. But of course, we're going to do something a little different. Over on the right-hand side, you can just drag and drop files into your project. So remember that random CSV file I talked about? So you can go ahead and open that, drop it into the project over there, and the system creates for you a data asset, all ready for what we're going to do next. So if we go ahead and open the asset, the first step is a preview. And so you're able to take a look and see what that file looks like. In my case, I've got 8 columns here. Looks like my first row is column headers. And then, of course, I've got my data below that. Now, if you really want to dig into the data, click on Profile. Now, it will take a few moments for the profile view to render, but it'll show you a lot of information about this underlying data set. So since this is a set of vibration data that's coming off of a piece of equipment, as you can imagine, you have tags that are indicating which particular pieces of data is coming from that equipment. And so within each column that I have here, the first 3 columns are really the only ones I care about. I get an indication of what the frequency of values are, the distinct values that are in there, the minimums and maximums and such. So this profile view just gives you a lot of information. Your next step could be using the Visualization tab. And as you can see across the top, there's a lot of different charts and graphs that you're able to choose from to actually see what your data looks like. I'm just going to choose a line chart here. And for my x-axis, I'm going to choose column 2, which is my date. And for my y-axis, I'm going to choose column 3, which is the actual vibration data. And there you have a nice chart that you can start to interact with. So let's start preparing the data. So now what we're doing is going to identify the transformations that we wish to make to this data. Like I said, I want to keep the first 3 columns. I've got some extra columns here, so I can just right-click on them and remove those columns. Notice as I do that, there are steps added over here on the left-hand side as to specifically what the transformations that are being made. So I'll just do this over and over again here, remove columns, just have a couple more left to do. One more. And we do a couple other steps here next. Notice that my very first line has got my column names in it, and I don't need that in my data. So I'm going to create a new step over here on the left-hand side. Going to use the filter function amongst many functions there. And I'm going to filter out lines that do not contain the word tag. Actually, just the opposite of that. Click Apply. I have another transformation step. And then finally, I know in this data set that in column 3, there are some zero values or empty values. So I want to remove any empty rows. And I simply choose which column would have those empty values in it. In my case, it's column 3. Save it, apply it. And now I have my transformation plan for this data all set. And all I have to do is come up here and click Save. Now, if I go over and look in my project, we will see that I have a new asset. That new asset is my transformation plan that I just created here. So as you can see, I'm developing assets in my project that are reusable. So one final thing to do is creating a job that will actually execute that plan, that flow from the data refinery, and to actually change the data. So I making a new job, I give it a name, click Next, kind of go through the wizard here a little bit. I identify my source, which I already know, my target, which is going to be my new look into the data, basically a new data set. And of course I can schedule this if I'd like. I can send out a notification when it is complete. I get to the end, everything looks good, and I create and run the job. After a moment, you'll see that the job is running, and these jobs can take a few minutes to execute, but in the end, you will see that the job is completed. So there we are. Job is complete. And let's go take a look and see how that affected our assets in our projects. Now we have what they call a shaped data source. That is a result of those transformations that we had in our data refinery flow. And if you want to see what that looks like, you just click it, give it a moment, and there is our refined data set, all ready for doing some work in Watson in our next sessions. All right, so there you go, your very first session in Watson Studio. Hopefully that was interesting, taking some basic data that most everybody has and transforming it, turning it into a good foundational data that you can then use for building models and other things within the studio. So hopefully that was helpful and interesting, and we'll certainly see you next Friday. And thanks for tuning in. We'll talk to you later.